The donkey shouldn't have been out that far, not in the part of the mountain where even echoes refused to travel. But when he came trudging back toward Mara's cabin, dragging a rust-streaked metal box half buried in dirt and pine needles, she felt the air shift, like the world itself braced for what she was about to find. She hadn't even opened the lid yet, and still. The mountain had already gone quiet. The mountain air had a certain weight that morning, quiet, expectant, as if the world were holding its breath. Mara felt it before she understood it, the same way she sensed storms long before thunder reached her cabin. She tightened her grip on the donkey's reins, the old creature plodding faithfully along the narrow trail ahead of her. She had woken with a heaviness in her chest, a feeling she hadn't shaken in years. It whispered, "Something is coming." She didn't yet know whether it was a warning or an invitation, only that she could no longer ignore it. Mara had lived alone in these mountains for 8 years, long enough for solitude to become both comfort and cage. She moved through her days with a quiet precision, chopping wood, mending fences, gathering herbs. Today was no different, at least on the surface, but something in the silence felt wrong. Even her donkey, usually indifferent to the moods of nature, kept flicking his ears nervously. Mara tried brushing off the unease, but it lingered like cold breath on the back of her neck. She whispered to herself, a habit she'd grown into. Stay steady. Whatever comes, you've survived worse. They were halfway down the ravine when the donkey stopped so abruptly that Mara almost collided with him. He brayed softly, not in fear but confusion, tugging against the reins. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at something half buried beneath a spill of stones. At first, Mara thought it was another chunk of scrap washed down from the old mining route. But then the morning light shifted, glinting off a smooth metal surface. Too smooth, too deliberate. Mara stepped closer, heart thudding, her breath forming small, uncertain clouds in the cold. The object was rectangular, the size of a small chest, its edges dulled by dirt and time. The metal wasn't any alloy she recognized, neither iron nor steel, nor the weathered tin that miners had left scattered decades ago. It felt wrong, out of place, as if it had no business being in these mountains. The donkey nudged it again, snorting impatiently. Mara hesitated, studying the strange grooves carved into the surface. They weren't ornamental. They reminded her of veins, branching patterns etched with purpose. Her fingertips tingled before she even touched it. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. She knelt cautiously, brushing away layers of dust and shale. The metal beneath was cold, colder than the air, colder than stone. And though it was half buried, it showed no rust, no decay. It was as if time had passed around it, not through it. Mara tried lifting the object, expecting weight, resistance, but it was startlingly light, too light. Her pulse quickened as she realized the donkey hadn't just discovered it. He had dragged it partway out of the debris, rope marks visible along one edge. Whatever it was, he had decided she needed to see it. Mara didn't believe in signs. Life had taught her that meaning was often something people invented to comfort themselves. But the timing unsettled her. She hadn't slept well in days. She felt watched when the wind died. She sensed movement in the forest when nothing moved. And now, this. She slid her hands beneath the box, lifting it with both palms. A faint vibration hummed through the metal, so subtle she questioned whether she imagined it. The donkey stepped back, ears flat, as though instinctively wary. Mara swallowed hard, feeling a whisper in her bones. This wasn't meant to be found. The walk home felt different. Each step seemed louder, heavier. The forests that usually comforted her, the whispering pines, the shifting blue shadows, felt foreign, almost hostile. Birds didn't sing. Even the wind refused to speak. She kept glancing over her shoulder, convinced something was following her. But every time she stopped, the mountains lay still, blanketed in silence. The box grew warmer in her hands, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to her proximity. Mara tried to ignore it, tried focusing on the trail, on the donkey's slow gait, on anything but the metallic pulse radiating beneath her fingertips. Her cabin appeared at last between the evergreens, small, weathered, but undeniably hers. A place built from memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. She pushed open the door, set the metal box gently on the table, and stood back. The moment it left her hands, the warmth vanished. The surface dulled. The humming quieted. Mara exhaled shakily, unaware she had been holding her breath. "You are trouble," she whispered to the object. The cabin's interior suddenly felt too cramped, as if the box stole space somehow, as if it carried the weight of another world inside its hollow frame. She circled the table slowly, observing the grooves again. They pulsed faintly in the daylight, though she told herself it was only her imagination. She fought the urge to open it immediately. Curiosity had always been her weakness, the very thing that had once led her into danger she'd spent years climbing out of. She forced herself to light the stove, make tea, and take slow breaths. But her gaze kept returning to the box, pulling her like a tether she couldn't sever. "Not yet," she murmured aloud. "I need to think." But thinking offered no comfort at all. That evening, a thin fog crept across the valley, rolling between the trees like pale fingers reaching for her doorstep. Mara stood outside, mug warming her hands, watching the mist swallow the lower slopes. Fog wasn't unusual, but tonight it carried a strange density, a hush that pressed against her skin. The donkey paced near the fence, restless, ears swiveling toward sounds Mara couldn't hear. She turned toward the cabin window where the box sat on the table. Even from here, she felt its pull. A quiet, invisible thread binding her to something she didn't understand. Inside, she bolted the door and lit a single lantern. Shadows stretched along the wooden walls, bending in ways that made her chest tighten. Mara sat across from the metal box, elbows on her knees, studying it as if it might speak. A memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp. A night years ago when she'd opened something she shouldn't have. A letter that had shattered her life. Since then, she'd sworn never to chase mysteries, never to invite the unknown. But life, she thought bitterly, had a cruel sense of humor. The box wasn't waiting. It was asking. She reached out, fingertips hovering over the lid. It didn't have hinges or clasps, no obvious seam where it could be opened, just smooth metal and the faint network of grooves. "How did you close?" she whispered, sliding her palm across the top. As if in response, the grooves lit briefly, dim like dying embers awakening. Mara yanked her hand back, heart lurching. The glow faded instantly. Silence returned. But the message was clear. The box wasn't dead. It wasn't inert. It was listening, reacting, and she was no longer approaching it as a stranger. Sleep refused to come. Mara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the mountain wind rose, brushing the cabin walls with long, restless strokes. She kept replaying the moment the grooves glowed. Was it real? A trick of light? Her own exhaustion twisting perception? But deep down, she knew better. She'd lived too long in these mountains not to recognize when something was alive with intention. She thought of the seller who never met her eyes, the donkey's instinctive reaction, the silence that began the moment she found it. She turned on her side and whispered, "What are you?" The next morning, frost glittered on the windows. Mara stepped outside to gather wood, breath rising in thin streams. The donkey stood rigid by the tree line, staring at the cabin as if refusing to come closer. She frowned, approaching him slowly. His tail swished anxiously. When she placed a hand on his neck, he trembled, not from cold, but fear. She followed his gaze back to the cabin, to the table inside, to the box. Something primal inside her stirred. Animals sensed danger long before humans did, and her donkey, stubborn as stone, was terrified. Mara spent the next hours pretending to continue her chores, splitting logs, patching the roof, but her mind was tangled. Every sound the box made, even imagined ones, tugged her attention. She tried leaving the cabin door open, hoping fresh air would clear her head. But the moment she stepped more than a few meters away, she felt an odd pull beneath her ribs, like a magnetic tug. The box wasn't calling her with noise. It was calling her with silence, inviting her back, drawing her closer, and she hated how badly she wanted to answer. By midday, she could no longer resist. She approached the table slowly, hands trembling despite every effort to steady them. The metal surface looked unchanged, but the grooves seemed deeper today, shadows settling into them with unnerving precision. Mara rested her fingertips lightly on the lid. This time the box warmed beneath her skin, not burning, but welcoming. The grooves glowed softly, a breath of light sweeping across the metal like veins pulsing with life. There was no mistaking it. The box responded to her. Only her. And that realization left her both awed and terrified. A low hum rose from deep inside the object. Steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Mara's palms tingled, her pulse sinking instinctively to the sound. She wanted to pull away, but her hands wouldn't move. The light within the grooves brightened, and suddenly a thin seam formed across the lid, splitting the metal in a perfect line. Mara inhaled sharply. The box had no hinges, no latch, yet it opened for her as if recognizing her touch. Her throat tightened. "This is a mistake," she whispered. But the box didn't care about her fear. It opened anyway. The lid lifted in silence, revealing not treasure, not tools, not anything she could have prepared for. Inside lay a sphere, smooth, glass-like, glowing with a pale silver luminescence. It hovered an inch above the bottom of the box, defying gravity. Mara stared, stunned, unable to swallow. The sphere pulsed gently, as if breathing. She felt the air shift around her, the cabin growing unnaturally still. Even the fire in the stove seemed to quiet. The mountains outside, once alive with faint rustles and distant creaks, fell into absolute silence, a silence that felt like listening. Mara stepped back, breath trembling. The sphere floated higher, rising from the box until it hovered at eye level. Light spilled across the cabin walls, soft and cold. Her vision blurred for a moment, not from fear, but from something that felt like recognition. A memory buried deep, too deep, flickered behind her eyelids. She reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing the surface. The moment she touched it, warmth surged through her. Gentle at first, then growing, expanding, reaching into corners of her mind she hadn't opened in years. She gasped as her world tilted, shifting beneath her. Then the mountains answered. A deep tremor rolled beneath the earth, subtle but unmistakable. Snow slid from the pines in a quiet cascade. The donkey brayed in terror. somewhere far across the valley, an echo rose, not human, not animal. Something ancient and slow, awakening after a long slumber. Mara clutched the edge of the table, heart hammering, eyes locked on the hovering sphere. The silence that had haunted her since morning thickened into something absolute. And she realized with gut-piercing certainty, whatever she had awakened wasn't done with her, not even close. Mara didn't sleep that night. She sat at the rough kitchen table with the metal box in front of her, its lid half closed like a mouth holding back a word. The mountain outside remained unnaturally still. No wind nudged the eaves, no owl called. Even the old birch by the stream stood rigid, its branches motionless against the sky. It felt less like silence and more like listening, like the entire ridge was waiting to see what she would do next. Her donkey, Bramble, shifted anxiously in the shed, hooves scraping as if the quiet hurt his ears. She pulled the lid the rest of the way open, heart pounding. Inside, beneath the folded cloth she'd already disturbed, lay two things. The first was a dull, fist-sized device of brushed metal, perfectly smooth except for a small circular indentation in its center. The second was a bundle of paper, thin, yellowing, bound by a cracked leather strap. When she lifted the papers, the humming beneath her fingertips grew slightly stronger, as if the object resented being exposed. The mountain's silence deepened, pressing in against the windows. Mara swallowed. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see who brought you here." She untied the strap and unfolded the top sheet. It wasn't a letter in any familiar sense. No greeting, no date, no name. Just tight, spidery handwriting and sketches of peaks, valleys, and lines cutting through rock like veins. Coordinates dotted the margins. At the bottom, a short note, underlined 3 times. "If this is found, do not activate it. The mountain is already carrying more than we understand." Mara stared at the words until they blurred. Her throat went dry. She glanced at the device again, its surface catching the dim lantern light. It looked harmless. That was the worst part. She turned the page. More drawings, cross-sections of the mountain, tunnels she didn't recognize, an underground chamber with concentric circles marked along the floor. In the corner, a small sketch of something that looked disturbingly like the box in front of her, with the word "anchor" scribbled beneath it. Her pulse quickened. She had never been a scientist, never been one for theories and diagrams, but she knew what anchors meant in bad weather. The only thing keeping you from being swept off the cliff. Was this an anchor for the mountain, or for something inside it? Outside, Bramble stamped again, louder this time. The urge to touch the device grew, irrational and strong. It wasn't curiosity alone. It felt like pressure, like the heaviness in the air before a storm. She slid her fingers along the edge without meaning to, drawn to the small circular indentation at its center. The metal was not just warm now. It throbbed faintly, a heartbeat under steel. Mara snatched her hand back, breath sharp. The lantern flickered. For a moment, the silence outside turned so absolute she couldn't even hear her own blood rushing. Then a distant rumble crawled through the ground, low and unsettling, like the mountain had groaned in its sleep. She slammed the lid shut. The hum cut off mid-beat. The pressure in her ears eased, just slightly. Outside, a single brittle sound emerged, a dry twig snapping somewhere in the forest. It was so small, so ordinary, that Mara nearly wept with relief. She blew out the lantern and sat in the dark, watching the outline of the box. "You don't want to be awake," she murmured. "And I don't want you awake either." But the pages spread out in front of her told another story, a long one. There were survey stamps, old mining company names crossed out angrily, references to a team that had gone too deep. The words stopped mid-sentence on one page, the ink smeared as if the writer's hand had jerked away. Morning came gray and reluctant, light creeping across the cabin floor like it was afraid to disturb something. Mara stepped outside, half expecting the world to look different, to find new cracks in the cliff, or trees bent in unnatural shapes. Instead, everything looked the same yet wrong, as if someone had painted a perfect picture of her valley and forgotten to add a soundtrack. No birds, no wind. The creek ran in silence, foaming white against the stones, but offering no song. She watched the water move with mute agitation. The box hadn't changed the way things were. It had changed the way they could be. She found Bramble pacing the small paddock, ears pinned and eyes wide. He came to her immediately, pressing his shaggy head into her chest, seeking reassurance he rarely asked for. "You brought it," she reminded him softly, one hand buried in his coarse mane. He huffed through his nostrils, something like apology in the gesture. Or maybe she was imagining that, seeing intention in an animal because she needed someone to blame other than herself. She scratched his neck, grounding herself in the simple solidity of him. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "We drag home broken things. It's what we do." All day, she tried to work, tried to chop wood, mend the broken hinge on the shed door, heat a pot of stew. But every task felt wrong with the mountain watching in wordless stillness. She found herself checking the box every hour, as if it could have moved on its own. It never did. Yet when she drew close, the air around it thickened in that same faint, invisible way, the suggestion of a storm that never quite arrived. By mid-afternoon, her nerves had frayed into thin threads. The papers called to her again. Warnings or not, they were the only answers she had. One page carried a simple sketch that made her breath hitch. It was her valley. She recognized the curve of the creek, the jagged line of the ridge, the flat clearing where her cabin stood. A small X hovered just above the cliff on the far side, the same stretch of stone where Bramble liked to graze in summer. Next to it, the note, "Anchor buried here after Incident 3. Do not remove without reinforcements. The mountain reacted to last activation. Massive infrasound resonance event, wildlife collapse, 2 casualties. Mountain went silent for 9 days. The word silent was underlined. Her fingers tightened on the paper. 9 days. She read on. The writer's tone shifted from scientific to frightened as the pages progressed. They described vibrations only instruments could detect at first, then strong enough to rattle teeth. Described flocks of birds dropping out of the sky, hearing organs damaged beyond repair. Described a sense of pressure on the mind, like thoughts being held underwater. Mara leaned back, her chair creaking in the quiet. The box on the table seemed smaller now and far more dangerous, a grenade with no pin to throw away. They hadn't buried it to hide treasure. They had buried it to keep the mountain calm. And now she had dug its calm away. The knock on her door made her flinch so hard the chair nearly tipped. For a heartbeat, she thought it was the mountain itself knocking. Stupid, she told herself. Get a grip. But her hand still shook as she opened the door. A man stood there in a heavy coat dusted with frost, his beard shot through with gray. She recognized him vaguely, the district ranger who patrolled the lower trails sometimes, someone she'd only ever seen at a distance. Today, his normally easy posture was tight. Mara Elling? he asked. His voice sounded wrong against the quiet, too loud and too flat. She nodded slowly, blocking his view of the table with her body. Ranger Kellen, right? He tipped his head once, eyes scanning the valley behind her over her shoulder. You notice anything unusual last night? He asked. She laughed once, humorless. Define unusual. He shifted his weight. We've had reports from the villages. Animals acting strange. Dogs howling, then going dead quiet. Birds abandoning the lower slopes. Someone said the wind just stopped. He met her gaze. You live closest to the ridge. I figured if anything odd started there, you'd have seen it. She thought of the donkey dragging the box, the moment the lid opened, the silence pouring in like water. She considered lying. The words lined up easily in her mind. No, nothing strange. Just a storm. Must be the season. But something in Kellen's jaw, in the way his eyes kept drifting toward the cliffs, told her he already suspected more. He wouldn't have come all this way for vague rumors. I found something, she said instead, the confession tasting like metal. Well, my donkey did. She stepped aside, letting him into the cabin. His gaze landed on the box immediately, as if drawn. He went still. For a breath, the whole room held itself frozen. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered. Kellen moved to the table with the wary respect of someone approaching him. Sleeping Bear. I thought they took all of these out years ago, he muttered. Mara frowned. You know what this is? He exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving the metal. Not exactly, but I know what it does. He tapped one knuckle lightly against the lid, then pulled his hand back like he'd touched an electric fence. My father worked for the survey teams up here in the 70s. They planted devices inside the mountain. For research, they said. Studying resonance, reading the Earth's heartbeat. But things went wrong. Mara slid the papers toward him. These were inside. He skimmed the pages, his mouth tightening more with each line. Yeah, he said quietly. This matches some of the stories he used to drink himself sick over. He looked up. When did it get quiet? The moment I opened it, she admitted. Like the mountain inhaled and never let the breath back out. Kellen closed his eyes briefly. Then it's already tuned itself. It's listening. The word made her skin crawl. Listening to what? He shook his head. Not what. Where? It's designed to map the mountain's insides using sound we can't hear. But the mountain always answers. She didn't like the way he said always, like it was a rule of nature that could not be bent. And when it answers? She asked. He flipped to the page marked Incident 3, tapping the underlined silent. Whatever's inside this box pushes the mountain hard enough that everything else that lives here gets drowned out. Think of someone playing a note so deep and loud that nothing else can be heard. Not your voice, not the wind, not even the bird's ability to navigate. It's more than silence. It's suppression. Mara thought of the dreamlike stillness outside, the soundless creek, the restless donkey. It fit too well. So we turn it off, she said. We put it back. We bury it again. For the first time, Kellen's composure cracked. You don't just turn these off. They were supposed to be decommissioned decades ago, but half the old files are missing, and the people who knew how are dead or retired. And if it's already in sync with the rock... He trailed off, staring at the small device like it might explode or whisper. Then what? Mara pressed. We wait while the mountain tears itself apart? He looked at her sharply. That's not what it's doing. This is containment. It's quieting something down there. Something they woke up before. The room seemed to shrink around them. Mara felt the weight of stone above and below, pressing from all sides. She remembered the words anchor buried here, the diagrams of deep chambers. "You think there's something alive down there," she said slowly. Kellen shrugged one shoulder, but his eyes didn't deny it. Alive might not be the right word. A stress point. A fault that behaves strangely. Every time they pushed it, things happened on the surface. People got sick. Animals fled. They called it the throat. He tapped the device. These were the plugs they jammed into it. Mara imagined a wound forced to stay closed. She imagined what would happen if it opened. A tremor shivered through the floorboards, subtle but unmistakable. A cup on the table rattled, then settled. Bramble brayed once from outside, the sound sharp in the still air. They both flinched at hearing anything at all. "It's getting stronger," Mara said, voice low. Kellen nodded grimly. "That pressure you feel? The headaches? That's the resonance climbing." She hadn't told him about the dull pounding at the base of her skull, the way her thoughts felt thick. But now that he named it, she couldn't ignore it. "So we move it away from the valley," she insisted. "Take it up to the ridge, away from houses." "And closer to the throat," he countered. "If this thing is sinking directly with whatever's under there, dragging it around like cargo could make things worse." His gaze softened with something like sympathy. "You didn't cause this, Mara. You just pulled the thorn out enough to feel the wound again." She bristled despite herself. "Maybe, but the thorn is in my kitchen now." She paced once, twice, then stopped. "What if it doesn't want to sink here?" Kellen frowned. "What do you mean?" She pointed at the papers. "These drawings, they show multiple anchors. What if this one was moved? What if it's fighting to find its way back to wherever they first tied it?" He considered that, brow furrowing. If it's out of alignment, then maybe that's why the silence feels uneven. It's not fully connected, but it's trying. He sighed. There is one place they always treated like a control, a neutral point. He looked toward the northern window, as if he could see through the wall. The high lake, deepest part of the basin, cold enough to slow anything, even vibration. Mara pictured the lake, dark, still, ringed by black rock and snowfields, a place she rarely visited because it made her feel small in a way she didn't like. "You want to drown it," she said. "Weight it down and sink it where the mountain can't hear it." "It's not elegant," Kellen admitted, "but it might muffle it. Give us time to figure out something better." Time. The word lodged in her chest like a splinter. Time for who? For what? She looked at the box, at the valley, at her own hands. She'd chosen the mountain years ago instead of the broken life waiting below. If the mountain fell silent forever because of something she'd dragged into her home, she didn't know if she'd survive that kind of guilt a second time. "Then we move at dusk," she said. "Less chance of someone seeing us. Less chance of whatever's listening, noticing we're changing the song." For the first time all day, Kellen almost smiled. "You and the donkey," he said. "You planning to make him haul this thing again?" Mara glanced toward the paddock. "He started this," she murmured. "He can help end it." Outside, the clouds thickened, flattening the light into a dull gray. The mountain remained silent, but under that silence, something new had joined the waiting. Decision, poised on the edge of action.